And thank you to my fellow candidates for putting their names on the ballot. You know, it's not an easy task doing such a thing, and I think they need to be congratulated for doing that. You know, ladies and gentlemen, when I first asked you for the honor and privilege of being your MP, I said I would do things differently, and so we did. We brought our offices downtown where you do your business. We changed the way we did things. In the summertime, we went out to every nook and cranny, whether it was Tucker's Corners in the East End or Eddystone here, not too far from here, or Bewdley. We held our offices in the summertime so that we could come to you, so you wouldn't have to come to us. You know, also, ladies and gentlemen, we wanted to make sure that we were accessible. And so we didn't just hold office hours Monday to Friday. We held passport clinics on weekends so that you could come out to them, because many of you work Monday to Friday during business hours. So we held our passport clinics on the weekends. They were very well attended, and we want to thank you for that. And we held consultation meetings on various topics, but the most important of which, of course, before each budget was our budget consultations. And I can tell you that much of those consultations, much of the information you gave me that was transmitted to Ottawa ended up being part of our budgets. And so thank you very much for that. You know, you're going to hear much tonight about what we've just come through as a nation, the worst economic recession since the 1930s. And we came out of that recession, according to the rest of the world, in better shape than most countries. We went into it last. And we began to leave it before most others. And we're into that recovery stage now, 6 consecutive quarters of growth, recouping pretty well all the jobs lost since 2000 and July of 2009. So thank you very much, because it's through your hard work and your taxes that we were able to do that, and we didn't have to cut back on the services to the most needy and those that needed help. Thank you.
I like to say this is the only place in all of Canada where you can vote Green and still tell your friends at the Legion that you supported the Tories. I grew up in Coburg, which is where I live now. I came back with my wife Judy Smith-Torrey a few years ago, like a lot of people in my age group, because of an ailing parent. But we're back to stay and quite enjoying being home again. I'm a scientist by training. I have 2 adult children. I have spent most of my life working in one way or another on energy issues, both for governments and businesses. For most of my life running my own firm, in the last 6 years with larger companies, and now I'm back out again on my own. I was drawn to the Green Party because I just had got to the point after, I think, supporting all of the other parties at one point or another in my life, of feeling that there just wasn't a sufficient response in these old parties to the problems that we're facing in the 21st century. And I saw in the Green Party, especially the way it's evolved in recent years, a party that's oriented to the future, that's got an approach that combines the fiscal conservatism, the social progressiveness, and the international role that I felt best embodied the best of Canada. I would urge you, if you haven't already, to take a look at that platform. There is a very brief version of it on the table over here under my name, which includes our budget, which brings the deficit down over the next 4 years. There's a much longer version that we would be happy to bring to you. If you're on the web, you can get it on our website. If you're not, just call one of the numbers in our brochure and we'll bring one to you. And we have very little time to start things off, so I'll leave it at that, except to say that I think that if you are like a growing number of Canadians starting to wonder whether the differences between the old party's positions really amount to the kind of difference that we need in Ottawa and the kind of difference that we need to address the 21st century problems of restarting and renewing our economy, preserving our environment, and putting a secure, long-term economic development plan in place for our children and their grandchildren. Take a look at the way the Greens propose to do this. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Thank you.
I'm running in this election because we need to protect our public health care system. The party of Tommy Douglas, the New Democrats, is the party that brought Medicare to Canada, and we're the ones that can fix it. We're going to hire 1,200 family doctors over the next number of years. The Conservatives say they'll only hire 100. There's hundreds of thousands of people across Canada, and certainly in Northumberland, Quinte West, including my own family. We do not have a family doctor. We need that. We need to have more nurses. We need to have more nurse practitioners and other healthcare people. We also need to decrease the costs of pharmaceutical drugs, prescription drugs. There's absolutely no reason why the federal government can't sit down with big drug companies and negotiate a deal based on bulk purchasing of generic drugs and cut the costs so that people can afford particularly catastrophic illness drugs, which really force people into bankruptcy. And as our population ages, we need to find ways to get those efficiencies out of the system. And there's lots of smart people working on this every single day, believe me. And if you think about the care that we get and sometimes take for granted in this country when we go to the hospital, and compare it to our neighbors in the south, and how many people there don't even have health care, even with Mr. Obama's new health care plan, and how many people go bankrupt trying to take care of their families every year down in the United States. That is not a system that we want here. That's a system that the Liberals and the Conservatives have allowed to get privatized by stealth over the last number of years. You've heard of public-private partnerships, for example. The former OPP Commissioner, Mr. Fantino, North of Toronto riding, now a Conservative candidate again. He won in the recent by-election. They got a $10 million grant from the federal government. It didn't go to the hospital. It went to a not-for-profit organization that's owned by a fundraiser for Mr. Fantino. Now, I don't know what you would call that, but I call that corruption. I think that's just appalling. Why is that happening? Our tax dollars should not be going towards that sort of thing. I think there's a trail of this kind of scandal. Now, Mr. Norlock was elected 5 years ago in this riding because the Liberals had so much corruption. The sponsorship scandal, the $1 billion boondoggle, the $1 billion gun registry, time after time, scandal after scandal. They'd been in power too long, and people wanted to kick them out. Well, you know what? You need to kick the Conservatives and the Liberals out and vote NDP this time. It's time to vote NDP. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure over the course of this evening you're going to hear a lot about our platforms, and that's why we're here to answer your questions. And I want to say thank you very much for taking the time out to come here and listen. As Mandy said earlier, it is part of the democratic process and something that we as Canadians hold very dear. I want to thank Mandy for doing this because, and the Legion, of course, for putting this on. The turkey dinner smelled just fabulous when we came in the door, so thank you. The election, this election is about ethics. This election is about contempt. I wanted to tell you a little bit about me tonight, about why I'm running, and what I see the vision for Northumberland Quinte West to be. I have been married to my husband Tom, who's here in the room somewhere, for over 35 years. I have 2 fabulous daughters, Allison and Stephanie, and 3 great fabulous grandchildren, not great-grandchildren, just great-grandchildren, let's be clear, who I enjoy spending time with. I think like all of us in the room, we have a history that's brought us to this point, and mine certainly has been very much involved in the community. I'm a business owner. I have created over 50 jobs in this riding in my career. I started Cook School Daycare, which is one of the largest not-for-profit childcare organizations in the county. I own Willis College. I was president of the Physician Recruitment Committee that brought the last 7 doctors to the West Northumberland area. I've been on the board of Hospice, Kinark, and various other organizations, and I'm currently the vice chair of the Secretariat for Private Colleges for the province. All of these things have had an advocacy role, That's certainly something I'm very strong at. As a citizen, I have changed public policy, both in childcare and in private colleges. I know it can be done. I know that not that many years ago, a previous member, Paul Macklin, who was the previous Liberal member, created the Eastern Ontario Development Program. It was created right here in Northumberland, Quinte West, and it then mushroomed, if you will, across Eastern Ontario. Things can be created in this riding. We have the skills and the talent in this riding to create things that are the model for other places in Canada. What's been lacking, in my opinion, and lots of other opinions over the last 5.5 years, is the leadership to get that job done. My platform is clearly about jobs. This riding has been bleeding jobs. We have the highest unemployment in the province of Ontario. There are other parts of this country, and I'm thrilled for them, where their unemployment has gone down. But we don't have it here. We have seen job loss after job loss. I won't continue. As I said, you're going to hear a lot more about our platforms. I want you to know a little bit about me and the fact that should I be fortunate enough to be elected, I promise to work as hard for you and your families as I do for my own. Thank you. In terms of, it's a good question. In terms of the $6 billion tax cut, clearly it is not demonstrating an increase in jobs. I mean, for one economist, Mr. Mintz, that we have that says it does, I can show you 30 who says it doesn't. I don't understand why we need $6 billion more of your hard-earned money giving tax cuts to banks and oil companies. You may have heard in the paper a few weeks ago, one of the banks, won't name them, but their CEO received a $100 million bonus. If they have wanted to create jobs, they will have already created jobs with a $100 million bonus. So absolutely, I don't believe they create jobs. The tax cuts, the thing that will create jobs in this riding and in this country, we know, are small and medium-sized businesses. That's where we have to concentrate. A lot of those large companies are offshore, and their profits go offshore. They don't stay in Canada. So I think we need to be really clear about what we're looking at in terms of who we're giving our money to. Because if you give a cut to somebody, that means you're taking that $6 billion out of the budget, and it's not there any longer. You have to find another way to get $6 billion back in. In terms of your second part, the democratic process, as I said earlier, that's why we're in an election. As Canadians, we have always prided ourselves on the ability to sit around a table as a country, 10 provinces, 3 territories, and work out deals. Russ mentioned our healthcare system. That was an agreement that lots of people thought would never happen, but it did because there was a will, and it was created during a minority government. If a minority government works with the other parties to do what's in the best interest of Canadians, we get fabulous solutions like our healthcare plan. If they choose not to and want to do it in a single-minded, I'm not going to listen to anyone else, you have what we have now.
Well, first of all, on the employment question, I spent the last 6 years in senior management for large corporations, and I have to smile when I see people correlate tax cuts for large corporations with employment. I can tell you that the senior managers in large corporations are given incentives and can only keep their jobs if they focus on finding ways to make more money with less people. That's what those big companies do. They're at a completely different stage in the business cycle from the small companies where the job generation and the new employment creation takes place. So tax cuts to large corporations as a job creation policy is really wrong-headed. In fact, we've seen from, I think, the Statistics Canada reports that have come out recently, and even the finance minister, Flaherty, saying, you know, it's pretty hard for us as a Conservative party to be supporting corporate tax cuts when all of the cash reserves of the large companies that we're giving those breaks to have been going up in recent months. So you can't depend on those large companies to convert tax cuts into jobs. What you can count on is if you can find a way to reduce payroll taxes to small companies, who generally speaking don't have any profit. And I can tell you from experience, and I'm sure Kim would agree with me, when you're a small company, if there's anything left over at the end of the day, it goes back into the company because you're totally focused on achieving your vision, growing your company, and if you're always thinking about how can we get enough revenue in here to hire the next person. That's what you think about every day, and I can tell you that is not the mindset that characterizes large corporate management, quite the opposite. So that, as far as employment generation through tax cuts, that's my opinion on it. The other question was about...
democratic value.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say? I'm out of time. Read the paper.
Well, you can say a lot, actually, because the Conservative government prorogued Parliament twice, first time in the history of Canada, withholds information from Parliament on Afghani detainees who were tortured, stops committees from operating effectively on Parliament Hill, appoints people to the Senate who have nefarious practices, potentially are in a criminal investigation, pulls people out of rallies, political rallies during this campaign. I mean, democratic deficit, the Conservatives could define democratic deficit. So I think it's very important for us to think about how could we do things differently? How do we embrace young people in our community? Like, there's not very many young people here tonight. It would be nice to see a real mixture of people, and quite honestly, the way to do that is to change the democratic electoral system from a first-past-the-post system to a proportional representation system where everyone's vote actually counts. You'd see more women running in politics. It would be a more cooperative system. We'd get a lot more done because we'd spend a lot less time fighting against each other. So there's a lot that can be done for democracy in this country, and it's a cherished value for all of us. Now, in terms of corporate tax cuts, I was trained as an economist and business person at Queen's University, and I took lots of economics courses, and I can tell you for sure, corporate tax cuts do not create employment. Period. End of story. And what does create employment? It's small businesses, startup businesses, businesses that are really growing, and those are the kinds of businesses that I've been working with for 25 years. I've helped start over 150 small businesses and farmers cooperatives and fishing cooperatives and childcare, various kinds of cooperatives, manufacturing right across this province. They have a 70% success rate. They've gotten barely any breaks whatsoever, but there are things that the federal government can do to support them.
Well, we'll start off with the so-called democratic deficit, which is not the case. The reason we're in an election, ladies and gentlemen, is because the opposition has more votes than the government. That's why we're here. You know, my friend mentions Afghanistan detainees. We're working with the Liberals, going through all the documents concerning Afghan prisoners. There is no holdback, but the only difference there is that the new Democratic Party chose not to be part of that process. So that's, you know, we're looking at simply arithmetic. They have more votes. You know, I use the equivalent of the opposition can say anything they want and say, therefore, Parliament is in contempt, and then they say, well, you lost because we outvoted you, and so it's just about numbers. But let me talk about the economy and tax cuts. Most of our tax cuts went for low and middle income Canadians, number one. There were other tax cuts to small business. We raised the amount at which the amount of money small businesses can make before they pay tax, and we lowered that tax from 12 to 11%. Let me talk to you about the other corporate tax reductions that, by the way, the Liberals voted for, because that was planned for several budgets ago. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, the Quinte West Chamber of Commerce, all in their budget submissions said, please don't raise those taxes, and we didn't. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses said, we're doing the right thing. The Manufacturers Association of Canada said, we're doing the right thing. Former Liberal Deputy Prime Minister Manley said, that's the right thing to do.
I mean, the Green Party definitely believes in a strong civil service. I lived in Ottawa for a number of years, and I can tell you when I go back and visit friends, they are very demoralized. The civil service, like Ottawa in general, is broken. It's not working. I think that there isn't any quick solution to this, but certainly the long-term solution, it's the long-term solution to a lot of the problems we face, and it's part of the answer to most of the questions that will be asked tonight, is that we have to restore our economy to a healthy tax-generating state. It wasn't your tax money that got us through the last couple of years. It was the $55 billion a year of borrowing that got us through the last couple of years, and we can't sustain that. And the Conservative governments actually have the worst record for borrowing in this country, going all the way back to Confederation. They always run big deficits, the biggest deficits, and we can't continue like that. And so there isn't, and the youth employment question has a very similar answer. The only way that we are going to have an economy that can give us the public services with the level of professionalism and service that we want is to have a healthy, renewed economy, and finding opportunities for our young people is a big part of that. We have a focus on the 20-somethings in the platform that you can read about, where they are given money towards tuition in return for the amount of time that they work in a youth employment corps, which we've devised. You can hear more details about that or read more details about that in the platform, but I'm out of time, right? 1 second. Where are we going?
Before I answer those two questions, I just want to correct something Mr. Norlock said, because the reality is most of the tax cuts have gone to the top 10% wealthiest families in Canada. For example, the income splitting tax cut, or the family tax plan as the Conservatives call it, 61% of that money is going to families that earn $100,000 or more per year. Okay? And low-income people are getting nothing from that tax cut because they have no income to split. And middle-income people are going to get the rest. So just a little correction there. And when you have corporate tax cuts, who do you think benefits? The CEOs and the wealthy shareholders. It's pretty obvious. You don't have to be a business major to know that. Now, in terms of the public service, I think one of the things in Canada that we need to regain our pride about is our amazing public service. We have fantastic, dedicated, hardworking people who take pride in their work. They don't get necessarily paid as much as they should. They don't have the job security that they should. Not that anyone else does either these days. Free trade agreements that Mr. Harper has signed over the last number of years, 6 new ones, and now negotiating the largest free trade agreement with the European Union. Companies would love to privatize our health care. Get rid of supply management for farmers. That's the only thing that keeps farmers going in our area. I live on a farm, and most of my farm neighbors are dairy farmers, and it's supply management that keeps them on the farm. In terms of the public service, no, we will not encourage any contracting out to private contractors. We think that we need to build a professional public service that has a long-term commitment to the people of Canada, and that we have a long-term commitment to them. It's about character in the workplace.
Well, you know, we could have correction upon correction. Since we've taken office, we have removed almost 1 million low-income Canadians from the tax rolls. So those statements about not helping the those in the lower scales. We've also increased, we've done a lot of things during the recession, workfare. More people were kept on the job. Companies told us we can't afford to lay people off because these people, when we start to get orders, are how we are able to grow our business. So we kept those people about 250,000 people, many of them in factories right here in Northumberland, Quinte West. We have, over the past several years, actually starting about 1.5 years ago, reduced by finding efficiencies within the civil service. We have not reduced the civil service in the last 5 years. As a matter of fact, the complaint, if you read most of the letters to the editor in some of the big papers or some of the newspapers are that we have grown the civil service. The federal government hasn't had the same kind of of pain during the recession that other companies did. And we're saying, no, now is not the time during a recession to be laying people off. But as we get to the point where we have to pay the deficit down, we're looking for efficiencies within the government that don't cost jobs. Secondly, if there are any areas that we feel, the government feels, there needs to be some reductions, they will be done through attrition. So it's the older workers and providing work for the younger new workers. But we have made a commitment to work with the federal civil service, the great men. I was all my life, I was a Ontario civil servant. My son out west is. So we will only do through attrition any cuts that may be necessary.
Rick's absolutely right. There have been increases in the public service, 13.2% in the Prime Minister's office. That's the only place I know that there's been an increase. I guess the other thing is, I just recently found out that we talk about service. The civil service is about service. When we start contracting out things, we have two problems. 1-800-O-Canada, when you think you're actually speaking to the government, you're speaking to a contracted company. Someone was telling me about some of the janitorial and cleaning services that have been contracted out. And now, guess what? Once you take away your ability as a civil service to perform that task, because you lay off people, you get rid of them, frankly, and you contract it out, you're then at the mercy of those people you're paying, because they can start raising their prices. They know you can't go back and do it. So you really have to look at, that's part of the problem with this current government. They look at short-term things. They're not looking at what's good for us as a country long-term. As a businesswoman, if I only looked at what was going to happen next month or next quarter, I wouldn't have been in business for the last 15 years. You have to plan, you have to look at what the long-term ramifications of some of these decisions are, and I think that's part of the reason we're here. In terms of the attraction of young workers, you're absolutely right. One of the platforms of my plan, the main platform of my plan, is about job creation. And we're looking at small and medium-sized businesses, an enhanced microloan fund for Eastern Ontario, and a specialty manufacturing for small and medium-sized businesses. We've talked to the economic development people. We've talked to the various players in the field, and it can be done. There are many opportunities for it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But what I also want to say is, in terms of payroll tax cuts, we have clearly said in our platform, to make it easier for those small and medium-sized businesses, we'll provide EI tax holiday for employment of youth from 18 to the age of 25. Thank you.
The CRTC is really fumbling the ball on lots of things. First of all, they shouldn't allow those big companies to concentrate the industry so much, including right here in our community. All the local newspapers have been bought up by one or two companies. It's just not acceptable. That's not a democracy. That is a democratic deficit in itself. In terms of the pricing of internet services, hidden fees, cable fees, satellite fees, those companies are gouging us. And they're gouging us because the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party have a free market ideology. And it really is just an ideology. It's not what's best for the people of Canada that they're concerned about. If they were concerned about that, we'd have more regulation. We'd have much more regulation, and the CRTC would actually have some teeth and would actually enforce some of the rules that they are supposed to be enforcing. I'm also concerned that we're going to lose our public broadcaster. Now, I've been listening to the CBC radio since I was a little kid because my mom had it on every day. And it's not as good as it now as it was then, but it's still better than listening to commercial radio that's got full of commercials and not really very interesting. I learned so much from CBC radio, and we need to keep that. So the NDP will ensure that we protect our public institutions like CBC. We'll increase Canadian content. There's amazing Canadian stories that we should be telling. What do we have to watch American sitcoms for? Ask yourself that. Why are they showing that stuff on CBC? When they have a special movie, they could dig into the NFB, National Film Board of Canada archives, but instead they show some Hollywood schlock. I mean, let's think about what kind of people are we? Are we going to be proud about our heritage? Or are we going to let the Americans define what's important to us? So I really think that The CRTC is a major issue. Those companies, we need to roll them back. It's the same thing that happened in the global economic collapse. 3 years ago, Mr. Harper was denying that we're even going into recession. We actually had a global economic collapse, and we're not out of the woods yet. And those same corporations are the ones that wanted to get bailouts. And it's the same thing with Bell and those large telecommunication companies. It's a license to print money. It's time they stop gouging us. What's the federal government doing to protect us as consumers from that kind of gouging? You know, we used to own, when I grew up in Alberta, we had Alberta Government Telephone, and now it's TELUS. We used to own those companies.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, the Minister of Industry has said that voiceover and some of the competition needs to be widened, and that's what we actually did. We increased competition. We told the CRTC to rethink some of the decisions it was making. But when it comes to Canada's public broadcaster, no one has been more supportive of Canada's public broadcaster than the Conservative government. In the depths of the recession, we did not cut back. And I received, anyone in here, you know, friends of the CBC, the letters that I received, we did not cut back on the CBC. As a matter of fact, in this budget that was just voted down, the CBC radio that Russ likes so much, there's a $60 million incentive to create quality Canadian content. But I'm not going to be part of a government that tells you what you have to watch or you have to see. Many of you in here probably have satellite. And I don't want to be the view police and say, well, you're only allowed to see so many minutes of that's your choice. But what is the responsibility of the federal government is to provide funding for a national broadcaster. And by the way, during the recession, the last recession, which wasn't as deep as this one, and I'm talking the mid-90s, the CBC, or the Liberal government of the day, cut back the CBC by about $300 or $400 million, I forget, but there was at least 3,000 to 4,000 job losses. We did not cut back on the CBC. So yes, this government is for competition. You will notice over the past 5 years, several CRTC decisions that we sent back to them saying, no, there needs to be more competition. And that's exactly what you will find we've done. And when we regain office, we will be going back at them saying, you need to rethink your voiceover. Because quite frankly, it's voiceover policy. When it comes to internet, or when it comes to broadband, we partnered with the province of Ontario, so all of Eastern Ontario, and the Eastern Ontario Wardens Caucus, all of Eastern Ontario, now will have, or soon will have, access to reasonably priced broadband. And quite frankly, if you talk to small businesses in the north end of the riding, out of the 401 corridor, this is what they need to grow their businesses.
If we look at the appointments that have been happening around the CRTC, I'm sure you've read about them in the paper, people who have no clue what they're doing in terms of ever being involved in broadcasting again, and the rest of them are made up of those guys who are getting a $5 million pension. So we have to look at who is getting appointed to these boards that we want to run these organizations for us. CBC is a national institution, and it has been tinkered with. And it's like anything else, in my opinion, that the Harper government takes a look at. If it can be on the chopping block, it will be, because they don't appear to feel they have to answer to anyone. And I think there's enough people in this room that believe that the Canadian broadcasting system is Canadian and needs to remain Canadian. Just in terms of some of the, a couple of things that were raised. One, the pay-by-minute usage. I don't know if any of you were part of that. It was more than a rally. It was a movement when that was announced by the CRTC, that they were going to charge per minute for internet use. And we talk about some of the people that live in the rural communities. Ever try and download a document on dial-up? Per minute gets eaten up extremely quickly. And had there not been such an outcry from the public, there is no doubt in my mind that that would have passed. The other thing I want to mention is, some of you, if you're on Bell, you probably got a check in the mail about a month and a half ago. Mine was $65. It was to pay me back for the overcharging that Bell had tried to get away with for the past, I can't remember how many years. It's always nice to get a check for $65, but you have to wonder who's watching these guys. Because I'll tell you, if they hadn't been found out, we wouldn't have gotten our $65. And I wonder how many other companies that are allowed to sort of go through this process under the radar are doing this kind of thing as well.
This is actually an infrastructure question. And some of the other candidates have hinted at this, but haven't really tackled it head on. And it seems to me that if you stand back and look at governments everywhere and the way that they are coping with the internet, they're playing catch up. The integrated circuit was invented after most, if not everyone in this room was born. This has happened very, very quickly, and I don't think governments yet appreciate the extent to which the internet is basically like the road system 100 years ago. This is the nerve center, this is the system that the new economy will work on and will work with. It's a public good. It's prone to monopoly. If ever there was a business or an industry where there is a strong case, just on pragmatic grounds, for strong regulation, if not outright government ownership, it's the information highway. That's the way that we will grow the new economy, and access to broadband internet has to be available to everybody, everywhere. And that will be also, as Kim has hinted, one of the keys to growing businesses in small town Ontario and rural Ontario. And I applaud what the Warden's Caucus has done in Eastern Ontario. I think that they've demonstrated a model for political action on this issue that people across Canada are taking note of in other regions where lack of affordable access to broadband internet is holding back economic development. It's an unacceptable situation, and it would be a priority of Green MPs in the House of Commons.
Northumberland Quinte West looks pretty much like the rest of us in this room. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and our bigger cities are beginning to look much different. And I don't see a problem with that, quite frankly. I think that Canada has always held open its arms to anyone from around the world who wanted to come to a country, wanted to come to a free country, wanted to come to a country in which you could worship, in which you could speak your mind, go to the church or not go to the church if you wish, that you could walk down the street and be, as long as you were reasonably dressed, you could express yourself in any which way. I don't see a problem with that. You know, in the neighborhoods I grew up, it mattered whether you were Irish or Polish or English, and we had those little skirmishes. But those were kids. That's just part of life. But I don't want to live in a country that doesn't treat everybody equally, and Canada does. So I don't have an issue with multiculturalism. I don't care about the color of your skin or anything else. I just want you to do one thing, and that is to be the best Canadian you can be, and to make Canada proud of you and you proud of Canada.
In terms of our multicultural policies, I guess one of the things, when I was chair of physician recruitment for West Northumberland and we were recruiting doctors, one of the things we recognized, and I know was recognized in other parts of the country, was our inability to quickly identify adaptable or interchangeable skills with our needs in our country. So as an example, we hear stories of physicians from other countries driving taxis in Toronto or Ottawa. That's true, unfortunately. And we don't have a mechanism within our country to address that quickly enough. We don't have something that allows them to come in and have their credentials checked quickly so we get them up and running. We have a doctor shortage in this country. We have people who have come here that with some additional training would be able to, and licensing of course, would be able to take over some of that slack that's been created in our system by not having enough doctors. So that's one of the things I think we really have to look at in terms of our policies when we're dealing with multiculturalism and immigration. I think the other thing we need to remember is we do have settlement agencies in this riding. And I know there's one in Coburg with the Horizons of Friendship, and I know that they were part of the group that lost some of their funding. I know certainly in Toronto, you're probably going to hear more about this, some of those agencies lost 75% of their funding. One of the things we know is that when we bring immigrants to this country, one of the biggest barriers for them to integrate in our society is language. So cutting back on those services by huge amounts of money, I think Ontario alone was cut $46 million. Someone else on the stage may have the exact figure, but I think it was around $46 million. And it wiped out agencies. We heard about an agency where the executive director just laid themselves off because they lost 80% of their budget. That doesn't help integration.
Well, I celebrate multiculturalism. It's one of the things I love about my country. And so like Rick, I think it's one of the really great things about Canada. It's one of the things that distinguishes us from the United States. But having said that, there are about 200, to me this is about some of the issues Kim has touched on regarding the support for and the processing of immigrants into this country. Right now it's at about 250,000 a year. That's 1,000 immigrants every weekday, day in and day in, week in and week out. The government's target is to take that up to about 350 or 400,000 a year. It's mind-boggling the support and the service and the language training and the programs that will be necessary to support and increase if we are going to ensure that we make the best of this incoming population, which is what the future of our country depends on. The natural rate of replacement of the Canadian population is negative, and the demographics of this country are such that it is the coming to Canada of people of all diverse cultures that is really the future of this country. And it seems to me that it's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be a percentage that fall through the cracks. I have a brother who works at the Brookside Institution. He sees some of these kids who show up there. It's the first time the system ever encounters them. They came to Canada with their parents, never went to school, didn't get the language, and the first time that we run across them in our system is when they get caught in the justice system. So I don't know if that's the response that you were looking for, or if it's really right on the topic that you were addressing. But multiculturalism, yes. Increased intensity of our efforts to ensure that we fast-track qualifications and support with language training and all the other programs the increasing immigration levels in Canada.
You know, one of the things that I think all of us cherish, in addition to our democracy in this country, is the acceptance and tolerance that we have for people who have different ideas, people who have different cultures, different skin colors, different religions. That is an absolutely amazing thing about Canada. And anyone who's traveled around the world, when they come back to Canada, they realize what a special place we live in. And I'm so glad that we're talking about something that's not just about money, because money's not the most important thing in life. Your family, your community, celebrations, all those cultural aspects that make life really worth living. Those are the things that we're talking about in terms of multiculturalism and accepting and, in fact, celebrating a diversity. And it goes beyond just religion and culture. It goes to different ideas around sexuality. So gay people in our society, and accepting the fact that different people have different ways of thinking and being. They're not hurting anybody. So let's let them live and let live, right? So I think that's something that is very important in terms of the level of tolerance and acceptance. When we travel around the world, people know Canada and have known Canada in the past as a peace-loving nation, and a nation that is willing to lend a hand when someone else in the world is in trouble. I think that we've moved too far away from that. We are becoming more like the United States, more of a military aggressor. Now we're in Libya. There wasn't even a debate about going to Libya. We're in Afghanistan now for 11 years. There wasn't much of a debate about going to Afghanistan either. And if it was up to Mr. Ignatieff, we'd also be in Iraq. So I think that Canada needs to step back and think about our foreign policy and think about peace and how we can create that in the world.
Healthcare. It's something that many of you know, if you've been reading the newspapers, that the Accord is coming up in 2014. In my opinion, we should have been talking about this a long time ago. 3 years in the life of a provincial territorial agreement, it might as well be 3,000 years. These things take some time. Certainly in our platform, there's a couple of things that we've done. There's lots, but let me just focus on two that I think are going to be key in terms of addressing this. Our population is not going to get younger. We know this. Home care is going to be a huge part of this. And we know that it is significantly less expensive to run. We know it is better for the individual and their family to allow that person to stay home. We know that in our hospitals, there's been lots of discussion around long-term care beds in hospitals. We know how expensive that is. If we can negotiate into that agreement a home care string, if you will, we know that we free up money for the provinces to put additional monies into local health care, whether it be hospital or services or what have you. The other thing is the pharma plan. I think Russ mentioned it earlier. Very clearly, I think we pay the second highest in the world in terms of our drug costs. And part of that is because we do negotiate them province by province by province. Not really very smart business. As a business person, if I negotiate, I have much better opportunity if I buy in bulk. We all do. That's why we have things like the bulk stores. So if we can negotiate as a country and again take those savings and allow the provinces and territories to use that extra savings to improve the local healthcare systems, we've come a long way. Again, I go back to my comment about short-term planning. You can't short-term plan healthcare. You have to long-term plan healthcare. You have to boom, bust, and echo, book written a long time ago. They didn't know our population was getting older. That's how we ended up in a doctor shortage. People didn't plan. They said, doctors are making too much money, let's cut the spaces in medical school, and look where we ended up.
I think that there's a lot of commonality on this issue across the panel here. You'll hear similar suggestions from all of the parties about things which seem like no-brainers in terms of delivering health care more efficiently, and it involves some of the things Kim has already mentioned with regard to increased support for home care, increased use of non-medical staff where possible, nurse practitioners, other types of paramedical professions. All of this is part of the solution for delivering it more efficiently. The aging population, there's nothing you can do to stop that. It is going to bring with it a number of pressures on our healthcare system, one of which is dementia. I think we're the only country in the Western world that doesn't have a national strategy on dementia. This is what brought me back to the riding, because my mother went there. And we are facing a growing epidemic in this area, and we are not ready for it, so that would be a priority. And the other thing I would say is that no matter how hard we try, and no matter how much money we can scrape together to throw at the healthcare system, we're not going to be able to fix it unless we get healthier. And this is a big part of the Green Party's attitude and approach towards health, is we've got to get healthier. We have a childhood epidemic. We have an epidemic of childhood asthma. We have 1 million Canadians suffering from multiple chemical sensitivities. We're all out of shape. So central priority of the Green Party on the health file is to increase the attention and the spending and the programs for supporting healthier lifestyles by reducing pollution and encouraging the kind of active, healthy communities that will allow the pressure to be brought down that is currently straining our healthcare system.
One of the reasons, besides the demographics, which is an important thing to think about, but another reason that our healthcare costs are escalating is because we're not focusing enough on prevention. And that old saw that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? That was Tommy Douglas's vision for public health care in Canada. Yes, have the hospitals and acute care taken care of, because that's an immediate thing that we really need to handle. And we need to have a strategy around preventative health care, diet, nutrition, exercise, not smoking, not drinking too much, having better access to food at schools. There's so many things, creative things that we could do to decrease the costs of our healthcare system and build a healthier population over time. So I think those are things that our public institutions could all cooperate on in terms of the schools, the different levels of government, parks and recreation, making it affordable for children to join in on sports and be encouraged to do that. Dr. Michael Rackless, I don't know if people have heard of him, but there's lots of great thinkers, as a gentleman said, who asked the question in Canada. And you know, one thing, I think we need to just step back for a second and just reflect on the fact that we have a fantastic public health care system in this country. Sure, it's got challenges and there's problems, but we do have one. And it's an amazing treasure that we have in this country. And it's important that we not lose it. And I can tell you for sure that there's lots of private corporations that would love to get a market share of our public health care system. And they already do. Pharmaceutical companies, the drug patent legislation that Brian Mulroney brought in when he was in government has allowed those drug companies to charge 10 to 15 times more than what those drugs are really worth, quite frankly. And they justify it by saying they're doing research and development. They spend way more money on advertising than R&D.
And I won't go through, you know, the demographics, the aging demographic, except to say this, is that I agree that we have to do some things differently. We also have to respect a few facts. Now, I know what's going to be said after I say this, but I will just say that what a difference opposition makes. Because the Red Book plans, pharmacare, you name the care, you'll be promised it. But will it really happen? But I'm going to say this, that the Prime Minister, myself, most of the people in this room, we buy our health services with our health card. Those services are provided by the province, and the federal government acts as a partner in healthcare with the provinces. And I think if we sit down together, you know, one of the hallmarks of this government is you haven't seen, with maybe one province exception, but of late things are better now. But one of the first things we did is we made sure that the equalization payments, we took care of that deficit, so that you wouldn't see the constant squabblings between the provinces and the federal government, because that doesn't get things done. So I'll commit to you that we will, as a government, sit down with our provincial partners and work out, look to the rest of the world. You know, we adopted our current healthcare system basically from Great Britain and the Scandinavian countries. And your observation was right. They've been doing things differently. Their wait times are way down. That they've done a lot of things, and maybe we need to look at that. But one of the things we will not do as a government is we will make sure that your health card still purchases those health services. You will, and that's a commitment we've made, that's a commitment the Prime Minister has made. So if somebody else wants to lay a doubt in your head, that's the political game. But that's what we've said we would do.
I've taken some time to summarize the NDP platform on one page. So I've taken issues that I felt are relevant to this riding to do that. So please pick one up. And I do talk under the economy there about the NDP's policy around fair trade agreements that are mutually beneficial and that don't just give away our public services, our water, our resources to private companies. Now, I grew up in Alberta. The tar sands in Alberta, the Alberta government collects 1.2% royalty from the tar sands. The average royalty in the United States from any state for any oil company is about 21 or 22%. In Sweden, it's 70%. So why are we allowing, it's because of free trade agreements, that's why. Why are we allowing these companies to come in and basically take our resources that are public resources? They're the ones that are profiting by it. Now, on my way down here, I went to buy some gas, and it was $1.25 a liter. So the price has gone way up. And who's making money on that? I know the small little gas stations that are independent, or those operators, they don't make any money. They barely scrape by. That's why they're all opening up convenience stores in their gas stations. But I know who's making the money. the big oil companies are making 40% profit margin on the bottom line every single year. They're making huge windfall profits. And the Conservatives want to give more tax cuts to those oil companies, and the Liberals voted for those tax cuts in the last Parliament. So the NDP is the only party that is actually going to work in the interest of the regular, everyday people like you and I, all the people in this room. We are the party that will support all the things that people in this country really cherish, like public health care.
Well, I'm all for a free trade agreement with the European Economic Union, and we are on our way to a free trade agreement with India, and that's going to allow Canada to have access to billions of dollars worth of GDP. You know, I don't care what anybody says about free trade here today. The world is shrinking, and Canada has a choice. We are a trading nation. 80% of our agricultural production is traded. 80% of the big three auto companies, 80% of that production, actually it's more than 80%, goes out of our country, goes south of the border. That means foreign dollars into Canada. You know, Canadians have a choice. You can build a big wall around Canada and not trade with the rest of the world, and I don't think we will be able to afford our health care and some other goods. Our provinces, of course, have set their budgets in line with the federal government's budget to make us one of the most competitive nations on earth for people to come here and invest so that we can create those jobs that we're talking about. But you won't create them by building walls. You know, I have faith in Canadian companies. I have faith in Canadian agriculture. I believe that we can go out there and we can compete against the best in the world. But we have to have faith in ourselves. We have to know that we can go out there and can compete. You know, the last government in 13 years had free trade agreements. Russ mentioned Sweden. We've, you know, with the non-aligned European countries, we have already signed a trade agreement with them, which includes Norway, which, by the way, their state oil company has just bought a huge piece of the Alberta oil sands. And that's because they see it as an investment. That's because they see it as a way to create wealth for their people. And we have to be able to create, and those petrodollars that Canada is receiving go a long way to create employment right in this riding, as well as help maintain our health care.
I think it's great that Rick feels that there should be state ownership of some of the oil companies, because that's what he's saying. Because he's saying to benefit Norwegian people, they own their own state oil company, and they bought part of the tar sands. Well, we sold Petro-Canada, unfortunately.
I do believe in trade, but I, like Russ, believe in fair trade. And we know that when we enter into these agreements, I think one of the things that should concern us most is how many of you have heard about the trade deal? How many of you seen any details on it? Okay, one. And only because my guest Judy is you really looked. We haven't been hearing about it. And I think as Canadians, this is very important for us to know about it. I just want to give you a couple of things. And I'm not sure if any of the other candidates attended the Food, Farms and Futures that was put on in Coburg. There were probably about 300 people there. I know you were there, Judy. There were a number of, about 300 people. And we had some presentations that were pretty scary. This agreement, we talked about supply management earlier and our dairy farmers. This agreement gives them the right to negotiate those supply management agreements. It also apparently, there is something in there, and this is just from the presentation, and apparently it's in her book, that it would also have some restriction in terms of municipalities about what could be sold at local farmers markets. So this is not some pie-in-the-sky agreement that only affects the big farms and the big guys. Let me tell you, it's going to start to affect us right here. And in the Liberal platform, we're giving significant dollars, I think it's around $8 million over 4 years, to farmers markets and local food. We need to be producing our own food here. I don't want to go in the grocery store anymore and pick up snow peas and they're from China. And they're in cellophane and they came over on a boat. And I don't want to tell you what environmental cost that has to us. Never mind the fact that we don't really know what was put in that ground in terms of fertilizer and how we got it. Remember the listeriosis outbreak? That was because we cut back as a government, or, oh, sorry, I got cut off again. We'll get back to this.
I'm curious, how many of you feel that Canada's a better place because of the NAFTA agreement? 3 or 4 or 5, a few more hands coming up. One of the things that occurs to me on this CETA thing, this European agreement, is probably most of you have not heard about it. In fact, that was Kim's question. No hands went up, except Judy's. And one of the differences between the Mulroney Conservative government and this Harper Conservative government is at least the Mulroney government encouraged and supported an open public discussion about NAFTA when it was being negotiated. I remember being at a meeting at Massey Hall, of all places, that was packed to the rafters with people who came out to hear a debate, not just about the business implications of the trade deal, but about the cultural implications. Margaret Atwood spoke that night. About the environmental implications. That's the reason I was there. I spoke that night. About the labor implications, about the human rights implications. Trade deals are not just about business. Yes, it's a world that trades, and yes, that's part of the future. We understand that. But one of the things that poisons our democratic process, and we've had references to the democratic deficit here tonight, is taking these kinds of agreements and negotiating them basically in secret, outside of Parliament, to the point where you don't even know what's going on. The first time you're going to hear about it is when some local business shuts down because it can't compete with some Belgian company that has a legal right to come in and eat its lunch, basically. So, and the other thing that we can't do is what Mr. Norlock did in his response and set this up as if it's free trade or no trade. That's the kind of way of framing arguments that leads to the rancorous debate that we see in Ottawa, and the shouting matches and the bickering. This is a complicated question that will affect every aspect of every Canadian's life, and it should be a public, open discussion, and it's not.
Well, thank you very much. I purposely didn't mention the province of Ontario out of respect for a person who I think is, who I know is my friend, and who's our MPP. So I don't want to drag him into a federal election. Let me just say this. When it comes to free trade, you know, you were told it was a secret. Well, in the House of Commons, we've been talking about it openly. We've been saying we're involved in it. We have, you know, the ministers involved have been talking to the newspapers. When it comes to supply management, no government has been stronger in support of supply management than ours. We have gone to the GATT on Section 28 at the request of our dairy farmers, and we're successful in getting the milk protein. You know, this business of we're in peril, we're in danger, it's in secret. Well, there's no secret pact anywhere. And we have said as a party, any free trade deal will come to the House of Commons for ratification, so that there's a full wholesome debate. The $1.75, I think it'll be closer because it goes up. It's getting closer to $2. Our party says that if elected, we will introduce legislation to do away with that. As far as the Bloc Québécois goes, this is a democratic country. They put their members forward for election, for a federal election, and there is no conceivable way, nor should there be, for a party to run in a federal election. We can have we have everybody from the rhinoceros to the marijuana party, but our party says it is against, and will introduce legislation to do away with the vote subsidy. And it will hurt us the most because recently we've been getting the most votes.
Well, per vote subsidy, a couple of things. I do agree with Rick. It is a democratic process. And the Quebecois MPs were voted by their constituents. They too pay taxes in Quebec. So if we are a true democracy, we will respect that right. The withdrawal of the per vote subsidy clearly, I don't agree with Rick's argument that it'll hurt them the most. If you remember how it's been, look how it's done in the US. We get big business that funds big government, and you start taking away the per vote subsidy, what you end up with is two parties. You eliminate the smaller parties that also have a voice in this country, and I think that in itself would be a total shame. We as a democracy allow, as Rick said, anyone to run. But when you start eliminating the option for those smaller parties to run, then you end up just like the US. We'll have a Republican or a Democrat. And depend what company or what big business interest wants to see them get in government the most, that's who will get in government. I absolutely do not support the reduction of the subsidy.
You're probably thinking, oh, I know what the Green's going to say. You know, we're used to raising all the money we spend in our campaigns. We're below 10% of the popular vote, which means that we have to raise all of the money for our local campaigns. The older parties only have to raise 40% of the money. Quite apart from the per vote number, there's a 60% refund for any party that gets over 10% of the vote. So there's a lot of ways that the political process is financed by public money, and like Kim, I basically support that approach, because the alternative is that money and who has the most will end up determining who is able to run the strongest and most well-financed campaigns. And if I had to choose between that option and the possibility that there will from time to time be parties that we really don't feel are in the national interest who get enough votes to qualify for these subsidies, I would choose the second option in the interest of democracy.
Thanks very much for the question. There's two things that I really have to give Jean Chrétien credit for. Number one is that we didn't go to Iraq. I appreciate that we didn't go to Iraq. That was a good decision. The other one is the per vote subsidy, because it makes the playing field level in this country in terms of who can get involved in politics. And we need to go further. We need to go further to a proportional representation system, so every vote counts. But the per vote subsidy really does make it much more democratic. It's not financed, as Kim was saying, by big business or big unions for that matter. And it really allows people to have more discussion, to hear more points of view, and I think it's a good system. Specifically with regards to your question, would you take the $1.75 away from a separatist party in Quebec? Well, no, I don't think we can do that. But this election, the NDP's taken their votes away. So that's good.
Well, thank you very much. I'm trying to think back to the policy, and the party really doesn't have a policy, but we have individual policies. And as you know, I've in the past been a member of Fair Vote Canada. I do still think that our country may have a position for at a future date, but currently I don't see a tremendous will in the House of Parliament from any party, with the exception of one that is thinking along those lines. But let me just say this about representation and you know, the Bloc Québécois. It's difficult for any country to have a separatist party, but I can think of other countries that do have parties that may or may not be acceptable to the general population. But it's a democratic country, and everyone does have the right to vote. I looked at proportional representation in certain other countries as a view to getting more people out to vote. And other than Australia, where if you don't go to vote you get fined, a lot of other countries do not have proportional representation, or that do have, I should say, don't necessarily have the voter turnout that they thought they would have because of it. So I'm still looking for better and more ways, but here's what I say to folks to get them encouraged to vote. You know, this country fought 2 world wars in order for us to be able to have the right to go and vote, to be able to do a lot of things that we're free to do, but the right to vote should be a responsibility to vote. I guess I'm in the very small minority of people in Canada who might want to look at the Australian experience, but I'm told that that goes against my party's policy. So I try to be a little bit quiet about it.
Question what Rick just said. I've done a lot of study on this. My understanding is that the average level of vote.
Tom, you're not running this time.
Oh, sorry.
Pat, just maybe let us answer the question first. Okay, good. Thank you so much. One of the things I was excited about this week is Carolyn Bennett, Dr. Carolyn Bennett, who was our Minister of Health some years ago and is now the critic for democratic reform, was in the riding, and we were in Campbellford on Tuesday. Wilf Day, who some of you may know, came up to Campbellford to have a chat with Carolyn. We have been, I myself have attended a number of the activities put on by Fair Vote, and there's some really good discussion that happens with those of us who are interested in it. Unfortunately, the turnout has not been what we would like to see. And I think part of the reason the turnout hasn't been there is because people don't understand it. We talk about first past the post, we talk about democratic reform, we talk about proportional representation, we talk about preferential ballot. This is an education, and in my conversation with Carolyn, she made a commitment that she is committed, and I would certainly support her, should I be fortunate enough to be the MP, to take this as part of her critic's role now and expand it to have a committee discussion looking at what our country needs in terms of, it's not just voter representation, as Rick said, not just voter turnout, as Rick said. It's about, I'm a woman, and if you look at the number of women in Parliament, frankly, considering we're more than 50% of the population, I think we're 17% in Parliament. Each party has a responsibility, of course, to nominate candidates and get them elected, but they don't always represent the makeup, I guess, of our countries, or all the interests of our country. So from that perspective, I do believe we need to take a look at it. I know that I have seen a proposal from some people on the preferential ballot. Whether that's agreed, not everybody agrees with that, but at least the discussion is happening. I'm supportive of the discussion, absolutely.
Yeah, the Green Party supports proportional representation. It's true that if we had proportional representation in Canada, there would be Green members of Parliament. So in the interests of full disclosure, clearly there's an interest there. But more importantly, it's not just about the research that shows that this is one way that you can bring young people back to the ballot box, that you can bring people who have become disillusioned with the political process and don't feel that their vote means anything back to the ballot box. It's just the modern way to run a democracy. We are one of the last Western countries to get on with doing this. You don't have to throw out your old system. In fact, I wouldn't want to see it go. I think it's important that we keep our tradition of a member of Parliament for each riding in the country who's the one who receives the most vote in each riding. But you can supplement that in various ways, and it's a long and technical discussion, unfortunately, and it will require public education. But unless and until we find some way to bring it in and get beyond running our political system with a design that really goes back to the 1800s, when we were all working and living on farms in small towns, we're going to have a political system which is really not a modern system best able to produce a House of Commons that will truly represent all Canadians. And so, yeah, we're in favor of proportional representation. Unfortunately, there's a tendency of parties to not be in favor of when they're in power and able to do something about it, even when they're strongly in favor of it when they're in opposition. So it might take some time.
Thanks for the question, Tom. Well, the greatest prime minister that we never had, Ed Broadbent, was the first parliamentarian in Ottawa to put a motion in Parliament to support a proportional representation system, and that was in the 80s. So yes, it's in the NDP platform. It's been in there for many, many years, and we really feel that it's a way just like the name of our party says, New Democrats, we could create a new democracy in this country. We would get more women running. The NDP in this election has 40% of its candidates are women, which is quite an accomplishment. It's not easy to get women to run in such an adversarial political system. And that's one of the most important things that proportional representation would do. It would be a more cooperative system. People would have to work together for the interests of all Canadians by having a proportional representation system. Now, to me, that's probably the single most important benefit of that kind of a system. And the reality is that everyone would have more incentive to get out and vote because every single vote would count. Now, I've been running for the NDP for 4 elections now. This is my 4th one. And some people might say, well, don't vote for Russ because, that vote's not really going to count. Well, in this election, in this riding, your vote's going to count if you vote for the NDP. And it's not because of proportional representation yet, which I hope we will have, but it's because the NDP has some momentum in this election. We're coming up in Quebec quickly, and the NDP is not in any way a wasted vote in this election, in this riding. And that's why I keep running here, because sooner or later, we're going to get elected here. Thank you.
Well, if you're talking about that general, the in and out, to the best of my knowledge, that's 2006. This riding was not part of that ad buying. We just weren't, because all those ridings that were Elections Canada we did go to the ones that were did go to court. This riding didn't. I was not part of that.
Oh, I am that. So you never got $9,000.
I don't recall getting it. You're asking me on the spot. I don't recall. To the best of my knowledge, we were not part of the ad buying. That was. Yes, was not part of that.